Okay, guys. So, welcome to webinar 3. It's our third webinar this week, and the COVID-19 Business Support Small Business Support Center. I was really looking forward to this one today, actually. Not that I've been looking forward to any of the others already, but this one's a hot topic, a hot trending topic, and I'm really pleased to have the guests that we have on today. We've got an additional guest in on aside of sort of Nick Howe from Natwest and Carl Reeder, economic commentator. We've also got Piers Mummery, who's now becoming a resident expert in all of our webinars themselves. But this topic that we're talking about today is it's about finance, financial planning. We're going to go in for about an hour. We're going to go in deep, and we're going to start talking a little bit about not just the financial planning side of things, but what financial solutions are out there. I know that there is a lot of conversation and debate going on whether things are appropriate, active, are they necessarily viable, accessible, and not that I'm going to be putting Nick in any way, shape, or form in any front exposure, but we would like to get some sort of perspective from the banking side of things, and I think what we want to also be able to do is give you guys some support and guidance and practical tips on what you should really be thinking about when it comes to not just your business strategy, but also your financial planning. So before we get kicked off, I want to introduce my brilliant panel. First, Nick, I'm just going to get you to unmute and just introduce yourself. How are you, Nick?
I'm very good, Ketan. Thank you for inviting me. So, yeah, Nick Howe, Enterprise Manager for Natwest, mainly across Greater London. I love working with different organisations who in various different ways support growing and building businesses. So important at any time, but particularly at the moment. And one of the things that we want to try and do is work in collaboration, work in partnership, try and share some of the best stories, some of the best examples, but also relaying information at such a time when it's so fast moving at the moment. So thanks for the opportunity.
No, it's an absolute pleasure. And thank you for taking the time. I think it's really important that we have this opportunity of getting perspectives from, from not just entrepreneurs and small business owners or the general public, but also you guys that are working tirelessly behind the scenes in the bank itself. Thank you for joining us. Over from Nick, I'm going to introduce Carl. Carl, how are you doing, my man?
Hey, I'm really good. Thank you so much for inviting me on. And you know what? I'm honoured that you decided to call me an economic commentator. I think that's the grandest title I've ever been given. But yeah, look, I'm a small business guy, but I'm also a chartered and a certified accountant by training. And clearly financial planning should be at the forefront of any business's mind right now. I hope that they've got through the initial bumps, and now it's actually about working out what's going to happen over 3, 6, 12-month period. So look, I'm really happy to be here. Thank you for the invite, and hopefully give some value for your attendees.
I'm not sure about hopefully. I know you will. I know when it comes in, I call you an economic commentator purely because I know you've had what is it? You've had those kind of columns in the newspapers, and you've talked about a lot of things. You've brought a lot of information out on the business front.
I've been in every newspaper other than the Sunday Sport. I'll have you know.
Yeah, I think that's a different webinar for a different day. Maybe we'll do that one on a Sunday as well. No, thanks for joining me, Carl. And last but not least, we have a special guest that's coming on. Piers, just a quick introduction for anyone that's watching this that doesn't know who you are.
Yeah, sure. So good afternoon, everybody. I'm Piers Mummery, more of an economic observer, I think would be my position. So I'm a startup and entrepreneurial guy. I've been around the entrepreneurial world for 20, 25 years, done multiple startups. And I'm particularly interested in this discussion topic around financial planning, because I've been on the operator end of having raised money, both debt, equity. I've been involved in lots of different ventures. And I know the pains that people are going through at the moment in terms of financial planning. So it's going to be fantastic. I'm going to be more observing here, but I'm particularly keen to see what Carl and Nick have got to say in terms of, how to plan out and how to raise and manage your way through this. So delighted to be here and happy to help, and thank you.
Amazing, guys. So just as I say, I'm going to keep you guys muted. You just got to unmute yourselves when you come up to talk. The only reason why is just to keep the bandwidth clear, just in case anyone gets a squalling cat or a kid wants to come in and sing happy birthday to you or whatever it is. Basically, trust me, I've got two here that I'm just waiting for one of them to slam the door as it goes. So, the fact that we have to adapt ourselves to home technology and working from home, let's hope this goes really well, really well. So, okay, I'm gonna kind of start off. There are a couple of things in here that I do want to address. I want to look at, some of the hottest parts of the topics. We're going to talk a little bit about what's been trending in the news as of today, and I want to get a perspective from you both, Carl and Nick, on what's been going out in the news around small business support. We're going to talk a little bit through those solutions first. So what's actually currently available, because I think there is still, even though it's been written out there and it's been laid out, I think there's still a little bit of confusion in the business community about what it exactly is and how people should be applying for things or getting access to things. And actually, I want to get some form of feedback and an opinion from yourselves about how effective are the measures that the government have put forward really for the UK business community. And then, as I say, we'll go into the cut and thrust of things in terms of getting some of the practical tips that you guys would recommend when it comes to strategic and business and financial planning for your business. So let's start with a bit of commentary from yourselves. Carl, I'm going to come to you first. That question, what is the current impact of COVID-19, you believe, on small businesses? Where do you think it's impacting them, and what impact has it had on them? Because I get a lot of mixed things, I'm hearing from our clients coming in. Either some are now panicking and asking for help with finance, and others are saying, we're thriving. We've got more and more customers joining us every day. So where's your place coming, with your business hat on? What impact do you think COVID-19's had on small businesses? Oh, you need to unmute. Hold on. Sorry. There we go.
There we go. Alt-A should be a reflex action for anyone who uses Zoom. But I tried to dive straight into it. So, look, this is a very wide question for the broad church that is business. However, what I'm going to do is I'm going to put pharmacies and delivery drivers and supermarkets to one side. Because clearly there are some businesses that are absolutely booming through this. Putting those to one side, it's been pretty torrid. And if I can take a big picture perspective and then bring it down to what I'm seeing on the ground, from a big picture perspective, this is very different from previous bumps in the road that I've experienced. So look, I've been in the business world, so to speak, since '97 when I first started my career. I've experienced, September 11th, I've experienced the 2007 through to 2010, 11-ish. So I've experienced both of those bumps, and they were very theoretical for most small businesses. The challenges with those bumps came about when you were trying to apply for finance or refinance, or if you were moving home. It was on events that they caused a real problem. This time round is very different because large swathes of the small business community have been instructed to close their doors. And that's unlike any of those previous events in recent history that we can remember. This is probably similar to what might have happened during the war. And it might be easy to be quite dismissive about this and feel that it only impacts shops or non-essential shops. It only impacts restaurants and nightclubs. It only impacts gyms and so on. The reality is that there is a knock-on effect that's rippling throughout the small business world. And unless you're in a sector that can really take advantage of whatever opportunities this awful virus presents us with, then actually you're at a point where, you're going to get impacted. If you're not impacted today, you'll be impacted by virtue of being somewhere in the ecosystem and down the line. So, if I look at D&T, for example, D&T's got about 3,000 clients, and We're obviously keeping a keen eye on what's going on, and the tuition businesses and the gyms and the restaurants have closed. But there's been an impact on the supply chain. The supply chain not necessarily being the people who supply directly to them, but people like taxi drivers, people like printers and so on. So it's evolving. Add to that the fact that you've got another challenge, which is it's a convenient reason for people not to pay. I believe late payment is going to become more and more apparent to many businesses. And I think that we will, unfortunately, without real support from the banks, not looking at you, Nick, but without real support and in fact, businesses being put on life support, we are at a very real risk of business grinding to a bit of a halt. And one of the key challenges is just the uncertainty around it, because we can't pin a date on it. You know, we were kind of led to believe that it was going to be 3 weeks on the first announcement of instruction not to go out. The reality is that we probably know, if we're looking at this logically, it's anywhere between 6 weeks and 6 months. I think 3 weeks is very unlikely, given that will be at the end of next week. I can't see that happening. But we don't know at what point in that period things will start opening up, the pace that things will start opening up at, and the levels of restriction during that opening up until we become completely back to normal. So very long story cut short, massive impact.
No, I love that. I like that point. And actually, Nick, I'm bringing you in very, very closely here. But to start from that point of where Carl just mentioned about business disruption in 2 ways, late payments coming into people or non-payments. And then the other side to this is this period of uncertainty of how and when these kind of businesses can get to some form of normalization. And that's going to obviously have an impact on how financial solutions could be provided to these kind of businesses. But with those two points there, what do you feel the current impact is? Is there anything else that you want to add to what Carl said before you attack those 2 points?
First of all, completely agree with everything that Carl said. I mean, I've done 26 years supporting businesses for Natwest, and I've never known a time, not just the severity of the shock that we've all received, but also just the kind of frequency of the updates, of the news, of the announcements. It's such a fast moving scenario, and that's part of it as well. I think we are a nation of shopkeepers, as it's once said, and micro businesses are so important to the UK. And I think one of the hidden aspects, which I think is only going to develop if we're not careful, is the actual kind of mental well-being. Because for the time, the one and only time, you're having this massive shock being dealt with you, but at a time as well where your work, your home, your family, your children, everything that's kind of dear and precious to you, you're being forced to stay within this kind of pressure cooker environment. So I think, the ability to really, get away from some of the anxiety for 10 minutes or whatever, actually is probably unlikely to have. So I think that's certainly one aspect. I think the thing that we are really suggesting and encouraging businesses to really explore, we know and we fully understand that no one knows how long this is likely to last for. And even if the Prime Minister sort of tomorrow said, okay, in a week's time you can lift restrictions, will we go back to exactly how we left off? I suspect probably not. So I think, again, it's about assumption. So I think what we are encouraging businesses to do, absolutely get under the fingernails of their cash flow, do what they can around understanding cash coming into the business, but also looking at the cash expenses, obligations they've got going out of the business. If they do need funding to kind of bridge that gap, then obviously let's have a look at that, but let's also put a sort of a date on it. So let's say that, okay, having weighed up the incomings and the outgoings, we need a float, we need a cash flow sum of X amount of pounds. That will take us to, I don't know, the end of June, let's say, for example, so that we're running on this kind of timeline, if you like, that says we're in control of the situation now until that point in time, but kind of a late May, early June, if things are protracted, then we very much need to review things again in light of that.
I like that, and I think it's kind of, as I say, we've talked about this time and time in almost all three of the previous well, up till now, all the webinars that we've done, we've been talking about taking control, and I think there's a mass of panic as much as fear of the unknown, and the panic of the fact that, like Carl just suggested, you know what, people could take this as an opportunity not to pay their invoices, let alone, kind of put this thing of, will I ever have my customers again? Will I ever have that business? And will I ever open the doors of my business again? And I know Piers has mentioned on a number of occasions on what needs to be done in terms of how to build recovery into the business, and we've got another webinar tomorrow, little plug for anyone that wants to watch, on how to what the practical steps are going to be on recovery strategies and how to make much more of a bulletproof business. So the next thing that I want to ask you is, what do you think the small owners, business owners, need to start considering? I know you mentioned just now, Nick, around mental well-being and the cross balance. Yeah, I'm coming to you in a second, Piers. Before I just if I give you the question, then they got a bit of time to think about it. You mentioned just now about mental well-being and the balance of being able to get out of that pressure cooker environment. But what do you think small business owners really need to start considering during this period, above and beyond just financial planning and control, and thinking about how do they diversify a bit of their mindset and give themselves a little bit of a break from that norm? Just as Piers is giving some commentary here, I just want you guys to think about that. And I'm going to come to you, Carl, first, of what you think they need to consider more of as well. Piers.
Yes, I was just picking up on some of the points there from Nick particularly. I think from an entrepreneur and a business owner's perspective, we're all looking as business owners for, where this end is in sight and what we've got to do to try and get there. So we're looking at some sort of bridging finance principally. So this is not necessarily expansion capital, it's not acquisition capital, this is bridging capital. But one of the things which is very challenging for the lenders out there, and I think business owners should be cognizant of this, is that a bridge has to have 2 points, one where you start and where you end up. And the problem at the moment is we don't know where it's going to end up. And if I was a lender, I'd be quite concerned that I don't have an ability to look at a business and know how long this bridging is going to be in place for. So the point you made, Nick, about, we can look until we get to, say, June. And when it gets to June, what happens if it's got worse? And then your current, your principal debt then becomes at risk. You're not going to refinance bad debt because you're not funding losses. So potentially, there's a real challenge here, which is trying to find the endpoints as to what you're trying to bridge. Are you bridging a short-term loss? Are you bridging a long-term decline? What is it you're actually bridging with your money?
Interesting points, and guys, take those gone. Carl, just coming into what I just asked as a point of a question, and also what Piers has added. What do you have? What's your take on this?
Okay, so first of all, I'm going to supplement what Piers has said, and I've seen, we see it in our own business, but we're constantly reviewing our funding platform and the way it's made up and so on. And actually, all business owners are now in the same boat, that funding is not about growth. Funding is not about going forwards and the stuff that we like to do in business. It's actually about survival, and there are challenges around that as well, with the very nature of the kind of people who lend, or the kind of approach of lending for survival versus the approach of lending or investing for growth. But for me, the considerations that small business owners need to make, the first one is, it sounds really obvious just stating it like this, but how are we going to get through the next month, the next 3 months? The very short-term tactics. Now, I know that in business we like to think of strategy and then try and be too clever about this, but this isn't the time for that, because for a lot of businesses, income streams have dried up, or even for service businesses, and we've seen this ourselves. It might be that your customers are still customers, but cash flow's drying up. So you need to work out, how are you going to cover it? Can you cover it from your reserves or not? Or do you need to do something different? And it might be that your service has been fundamentally destroyed by the lockdown. So, for example, gyms. You know, I know of some gym owners who are renting their equipment out. I know of some gym owners doing virtual classes. Obviously, there's the risk of things like virtual classes, but somebody like Joe Wicks can come along and take all of your customers. There's these things you need to do, but you need to work out, how am I going to be salvaging the best of the situation immediately? It also gives us a very good and timely opportunity to really critically look at our business. Because I don't believe now is the time for cutting out every single cost you've ever incurred, but it is the time to trim the fat. You know, it's awful to say this because it's people's livelihoods, but it is the opportunity as a business owner to look at look at your team. Do you need all of your team members, or should you be taking advantage of a government scheme, which will be a whole lot preferable for them than the business closing in a month's time? You know, what should you be spending money on? What shouldn't you be spending money on? And making sure that you're not cutting completely to the bone, but you're keeping the business on life support, so that at the end of this process, and it is the big unknown when that will be, we've got a business to then take advantage of the pent-up demand that will be in the economy, and to take advantage of the fact that this isn't a recession in the traditional form, in that it's not a recession based on economic factors, it's a recession based on health factors. You know, from an underlying perspective, the economy was actually doing okay before. So there's no reason that if managed properly, it can't be doing okay afterwards. And there's opportunity that comes from that too. I think that, those are things. And then getting down to basics with cash flow as well. I don't want to go into cash flow too much at the moment, because I'm sure that's going to be a subsequent question. But just the very broad brush comment of making sure that you're on top of your finances, again, not necessarily from a 3-year projection perspective, but can you make payroll perspective?
I like that. And Nick, do you know what? Looking at what Piers was saying, and looking at what Carl's addressed, coming from a banking perspective, so from a bank's perspective, I guess what's been listed out here is what Piers has also mentioned in the past, which is there are probably 3 things that a business needs to look at: cost reduction, where that additional funding is going to come into and where it's going to be placed, and then also how you're going to trade yourself out of this crisis in this moment in time. If a small business was to come to you today with that kind of mindset, mentality, approach, or strategy, how well would that be received within the bank? Is that sufficient for a business to actually start to look at building financial solutions from the bank, or do they need to look at more considerations in other areas?
Yeah, so I think as of this moment in time, I think you're absolutely right. I think the key line under the whole coronavirus business interruption scheme is this line of you'll need a borrowing proposal to provide us with, which we consider viable were it not for the pandemic. And I think that's the real key line. So you're looking at the fundamentals in terms of what the business done up until we were all under kind of restrictions. Obviously understanding actually what impact directly for that business has the pandemic meant. So Carl mentioned, the gym, so the classes they've not been able to do, the memberships they've not been able to take in because they're not opening, etc., etc. So it's a direct correlation in terms of understanding the restrictions and the impact it's had on the actual business itself. I think then what we also need to understand, and this is kind of a live sharing really. There are a lot of businesses. I mean, I've taken lots and lots of calls in the last couple of weeks, which all of my colleagues are fiercely trying to get to as many of them as we can. And there is actually a very distinct several groups of business owners that we're chatting to. Mm-hmm. There is a big chunk, and I would probably say half, and it's only anecdotally from the ones that I've had, but over half of them are just kind of sizing out their options right now. You know, they've heard about all these schemes. They're not really sure, you know, is there a scheme available? What do I have to do if I want to apply? How does it work? So, as I say, in all the calls that I've had in the last sort of couple of weeks since the scheme was launched, I would say probably half are just kind of sizing out, you know, what is there out there for me? I need to chat to someone, and that's kind of, you know, seeing where their options lay. I think going back to the earlier question as well, with regard to the challenges that business owners facing, and I think, you know, utopia, if we had a magic wand and we were able to do things differently as a country, then I think one of the things is, you know, you've got all these constituent parts. You know, you've got the local authority for some of the rates grants relief that are being run. You've got HMRC who are running the furlough staff wage schemes. You've got the bank in terms of coronavirus business interruption loan scheme. So there's so many constituent parts, which if I qualified as a business and I wanted to apply for all of them, wow, you know, that's a huge piece of work to follow up with. So I think that's the sort of angle that, again, in some of those conversations we're having, that seems to be a consistent part as well.
So can I just pick up on a point quickly? So yeah, you're absolutely right that this is it's actually quite a complicated area for small businesses, and I've been involved with some of the government lobbying as well. So I've kind of seen the arguments around the schemes that have been introduced for business, seen some of the opinions back and forth, but I've also seen, as we all have, you know, you don't need to be involved in any kind of lobbying to see that the government is making statements first and then working out how to fix afterwards. So, you know, we've got the grants on the rates, we've got the tax deferrals and so on. There are some very practical issues with, in particular, the deferrals that they put in place where they don't work. The business interruption loan scheme was put out, and then it felt to us that the details were then sorted out afterwards by British Business Bank. Nick, you might know more from that than us, but it felt like it was a bit of a, right, how do we get this existing scheme and convert it so that it's suitable for this? The administration of HMRC on following workers, but also then the sheer lack of communication. I think what's happened is the government have tried to get 80% right and then tweak as needed, 80% right, tweak as needed. So, for example, I was involved in the lobbying around the self-employed because employees were kind of looked after. The reality, the devil in the detail, is that yes, employees are looked after if businesses are sat on cash to pay them, because it's going to take a month or so to reclaim it from HMRC. Self-employed came in, obviously it doesn't cover one-man band limited companies, which is a big gaping hole, but I understand the reason for that gaping hole, and I understand the government's argument on it. But again, that doesn't come into play until June, it's projected. So it's kind of all over the shop. And then you've got senior politicians, ministers on BBC Question Time saying things that are very different to the guidance that HMRC are putting out. You've got Robert Jenrick saying that all self-employed, even if they've started this year, can have support, provided they've got evidence. And HMRC saying very clearly in black and white, this is what you need to provide. So I think that the fact that there's a number of organisations and a huge level of bureaucracy around the government statements is going to end up being quite unsettling for small business. And I hope that whilst it keeps my teams very busy, it keeps the newsfeed very busy, but I genuinely believe that the government needs to continually keep tweaking this until it gets right and put pressure on the organisations involved, whether it's the local councils, which they seem to be doing a good job at the moment, whether it's HMRC, and indeed the delivery partners in the banks, to make sure that the support really does end up keeping the businesses afloat and the employees paid.
Can I chime in just and pick up on something that Nick said? I think is quite interesting, which is, Nick, your comment about that banks are able and willing to lend if the underlying proposal is good, were it not for COVID-19. which resonates quite strongly for me. And I think one of the things that sort of leads into is that many businesses out there have never borrowed before because they've never needed to borrow, and now are being forced to borrow because of extreme and very quick circumstances. And there's almost, from a business owner's point of view, maybe a small triage exercise to do, which is to sort of look at things in the context of what you said, which is when you look at your revenue, which is principally, everything's been grinding to a halt and slowed down, so everyone's going to be cash strapped to one degree or another. There are three things I would look at in my own business, any business, which is looking at the revenue. So decide whether your business revenue has been cancelled or lost forever. In the case of, say, a retail shop, you go into a shop, they're not open, you can't put money through the till. So that's one. Has your revenue been delayed or deferred because of timing, because I need to physically see somebody, or I won't transact unless I've got something? So is that business deferred, or is it just going to reduce? So we were going to spend X, we're now going to spend Y. And I think those three factors for me, in terms of assessing my own revenues as a business owner, I would put into the context of how I'd approach a bank from a lending perspective. So it's more just an observation to build on that, and I wondered if you had any thoughts.
Yeah, I certainly agree, Piers, because again, you're absolutely right. Again, it's probably about half and half of our businesses who don't borrow at all, never have, and suddenly they're perhaps at this stage where perhaps they're thinking, because there's no income on the horizon, they may well need to kind of sound out and get advice in terms of what am I eligible for, what can I consider, and what do I need to do. And this is the bit that I understand completely, the angst, the anxiety that business owners have about how quickly some of the funds need to get out the door, but we also have a responsibility to that business owner that has never borrowed before, and they kind of don't understand the process, they don't know what's needed, what sort of questions to ask, what sort of features to really be weighing up and considering. And this is the other thing as well, is that we have to remember it's a loan facility. So the way that the scheme, the coronavirus business interruption loan scheme works is that it's over a 6-year term, and the first 12 months is interest free to the business. And every hope is that when we're over this horrendous pandemic and we're able to start going back into whatever the sort of normal world might look like after it, that businesses can kind of be able to be in receipt of offering their services, receive their income, and start paying down that debt as quickly as possible. If it then moves into year 2, 3, 4 thereafter, then obviously there would be the kind of repayment terms that we need to also set as part of that agreement. But for a business owner, you're thinking, you're watching the news, you've got all these uncontrollable things and factors that you've got in front of you, and you're being faced with some really serious deliberations around, is it the right thing for me, for my family, to borrow X amount of pounds today in the hope that I will in 6 months' time be able to pick up and start generating that income? Is that the right thing for me? So I totally empathise with all of those different scenarios that people are being faced with at the moment.
Yeah, brilliant. So I think just to build on that a little bit, Nick, as well, I think that we're in the very first time that the business, the cash flow forecasting process, the business planning process for this doesn't just involve a best case, worst case, and middle case. It actually has so many variables that are known and so many variables that are unknown. For example, do I lay off 10 staff, 20 staff, 30 staff? And there's so many things to play around with that actually it can be quite overwhelming for a business owner to juggle these different forecasts.
Yeah, agree. And I think this is where the value of your network, of your finance team, of your accountant relationship, all of these great people are absolutely fundamental. I mean, we work very closely with some fantastic enterprise agencies across the country as well. And I know they're doing an awful lot of work to try and get out there to help business owners exactly in this situation for the first time. I think the key thing that we are very much encouraging at the moment is, if you're pulling that projection, is be very clear on what your assumptions actually are. So as you said, Carl, you know, if it's about, you know, 25% of my staff have been laid off, or 50% of my staff been placed under furlough, as long as everyone's clear on that actual assumption that you've been made, then we know what we're working towards. So as time ticks on, and if the situation does either improve or worsen, then again, we know what sort of factors we're needing to mitigate against.
And I think I just want to add in here at this stage, and Nick, this is kind of directed to you, because not because, well, you're the only person from a bank perspective, but it's how, you know, you're representing the sort of banking industry here in this call. What's your take on input on having more private sector organizations, you know, maybe like Enterprise Lab and others, Enterprise Nation? There's loads of these support structures that have experts and entrepreneurs that understand how business works, working with these smaller businesses in line before they actually come forward and start looking at their sort of funding solutions. Because what I just heard you guys talking about are things in here which create anxiety, confusion, and uncertainty to these small business owners. And you know what, there's a slide coming in a minute on how the media are trashing banks at the moment. And I just think that there is a call here to actually have some form of partnerships or arrangements with these entrepreneur groups, that we could provide some more business counseling, relief, diagnostics, you know, the triage that Piers was talking about, or, you know, understanding, you know, Carl mentioned the kind of pain that these guys are going to go through. What's your kind of response on having something like that structured, where we, you know, the banks work more closely with these kind of private organizations?
I think by all means, we work with a whole host of organisations, you know, the ICAEW, National Enterprise Network. There's just, you know, just a couple of them, but there'll be a whole host of different teams and supporters. I think I would never kind of prescribe to recommending a certain person or body, because every owner is different, and I think you've got to find your kind of like-minded tribe, if you like. So that person where, you know, you can pick the phone up, you can share all your worries, all your concerns with that person, and know that it's been received, it's been kind of understood in the right way, and the feedback is accordingly. But I think we're at a time now where, for two reasons really. So first of all is kind of that expertise line. So, you know, no one knows the answer to everything, and I think the bigger your squad is of all these different sort of skill sets, different experts, ideally someone that within your network has used a great person and they've really helped them out, then that's absolutely fantastic. But I think secondly, again, coming back to what we said right at the start, you know, we're kind of feeling, I think, a lot of us trapped in a space in our homes. And I think one of the sort of the anxiety levels, you know, do understandably rise. And so if you've got that escape, you've got that sounding board, you've got that person that you can really position where your worries are, hopefully it really does help alleviate some of those sort of anxiety issues as well. So definitely it's always been about having a stronger squad as you got around you as best you possibly can.
Brilliant. I've got a question that's come in. I'm going to take it in now. It could be something that you guys can maybe get a direct answer to straight away, or you can park it and bring it back a bit later. I'm conscious of the fact that we've been going on this and we've still got so many other areas that we want to cover. But Lisa Samet has questioned in saying, is my small preschool eligible for a small grant? I've had it for 8 years now and rent premises from L&Q. Please advise, as cannot get through to council or HMRC. So I guess what they're asking here is, would a preschool kind of be eligible for a small grant? I think this is going to be a question more directive on local authority, be rateable value relief, I think it is. Would you guys agree with this?
I think, yeah, I saw that question as well, actually, and I'll just chime in on that. My thoughts would be, obviously you can get the grants, as I understand it, is really for business relief, rate relief. So if you're a small business and you get rate relief, then you can claim up to £10,000 as a grant. So there is probably worth pursuing that. But equally, if you're classed as a retail business, you can get, you know, it depends on your rateable value and how big the organisation is, but you can get a grant. I think it's up to £25,000 if your class is a retailer. I don't know whether a preschool class is that. There might be something on the small business rate relief.
I do have some information on that, just very quickly. Business rate holidays, retail, hospitality and leisure for England only covers shops, restaurants, cafes, pubs, bars, cinemas, live music venues, assembly and leisure, hotel, guest and boarding, and self-catering. Then the cash grant you're talking about, which is the SBBR, or the RRR, which is the rural rate relief, is up to 25,000 per property. Rateable value of up to 15,000 will be eligible for £10,000. If you are between 15,000 and 51,000 in rateable value, you'll get 25,000. But according to what the Chancellor announced and what HMRC have written, and Lisa, you may need to go back to businesssupport.gov.uk to look at this. The local authority or your local authority will inform you. So I know you're trying to get hold of the council, but apparently the way this is going to work is if you qualify, the council or the local authority will contact you. Again,
can I just add something there? Lisa's just commented that I think that she doesn't pay rates. One thing I would urge you to do is actually to have a conversation with your landlord, because it could well be that your landlord is actually then paying the rates. It could be that your landlord's entitled to some of this grant support, and I'm thinking, well, his business or her business has not necessarily been disrupted hugely, and it may be an opportunity perhaps to work in cooperation with your landlord to see whether some of that support could actually be used to actually help your very important nursery school business.
Thank you. Thanks for that, Nick. Right, I'm going to press forward. We have we're already into the thick of things. I know this. We have got some more sessions coming, so we'll break out a lot of this kind of information as we go along. So, what support is out there? I think we've covered this kind of thing. You've got the CBILS, you've got the job retention scheme, you've got now the self-employment relief scheme coming up, the business rate holidays, rateable value grants, and the small business relief rates. Small print, does it really make sense? Is it hard to access? At the moment, one thing that I'll implore all of you out there right now is be a little bit more patient, be a bit more pragmatic, come and ask the questions, get more and more information. Don't just hunker on the phone to the councils or to HMRC. There are so many other ways that you can get more and more information around this, because you could end up sitting there for 5 to 6 hours and not getting anything, and that's just going to frustrate you. So, you know, come out into some of these communities, into these groups, maybe kind of reach out and find if there is anyone else that has been getting through or got some experience, because this will start helping you with your knowledge. But be patient and be pragmatic. It's a little bit what Carl mentioned earlier around the fact that 80% of it's being completed and 20% of it needs to be kind of refined and pushed as it goes along. So it's a great push.
Okay, so just to put some flavour onto that as well, with the coronavirus business interruption loan scheme, we were fortunate to have early access to the details of it and how it was looking through some of the activities that I've been involved in. The reality was that took a couple of days until it filtered through Natwest to our regional manager, who was then able to feed us back what we had heard on the grapevine. I've noticed certainly on online communities and so on that people have been very tetchy, and something said on TV, they want to know now what the answer is, and it's an awful time. We're all feeling it.
Yeah.
But yeah, you absolutely have to wait, because these things do take time for the government and the organisations to actually tidy up after they're mentioned.
And Carl, just to add on to that as well, so I'm advising some businesses in the US as well as over here, and I'm working with a client of mine here in the UK, and there's a lot you can be doing outside of just chasing the council and the government, which is, I can tell you now, and I'm sure Nick will back this up, whatever lending you want, you're going to have to go through and prepare quite a lot of documentation for this. At the very least, for the CBILS loan, you've got to put a written business plan, a P&L budget, a cash flow forecast, assumptions, sensitivity. And in the US, there's a huge amount of documentation required. So, you know, get on and do that, and just let this take its natural course. So in putting a written plan together requires brain power, you know, engagement with people, thinking, putting business, financial models together. It's a lot of work to do there, which you don't need any help from the outside world from. You just got to get on and do this yourself. So,
anything else to add there, Nick?
No, I think, yeah, I mean, all our processes on our the NatWest website, so you can actually see the questions and kind of the angles that we need to understand from your point of view. So, you know, particularly around how the pandemic has impacted on your particular business. Certainly agree, you know, and thank you to Carl for saying it. Is, you know, literally we are trying to get there as quickly as we possibly can, but you can imagine how many detailed conversations we're having with business owners, so we kind of need to kind of work through that. I think the other thing as well is, you know, I do expect things to change. So I mean, we were first out the blocks when we launched the scheme. We actually made it clear that if we support a limited company through the Sybil's loan, that actually we wouldn't be asking for a personal guarantee, and that has been now matched by the other three of the biggest four. So I think there will ultimately be sort of continued change and evolving of what is a very sort of new process, but, you know, with a lot of moving parts, and genuinely we're all trying to get to the same place.
No, absolutely. And do you know what? This is kind of nicely and timely to coming into where we're talking about. When this was first announced, obviously the Chancellor has to do this with great enthusiasm as much as possible, because he's trying to, you know, keep that positive drive going. I know that there was a lot of what's been announced from the Chancellor that's there to really help stabilize our markets to a certain extent. There is going to be a lot of disruption in the service itself, because it's all new as well. We need to still get through a phase of getting people through and qualifying and accessing funds. There is this impatience, and the reason why I guess there is this impatience is because there is such a high level of ignorance to this. People don't really understand that, okay, you know, we've had to automatically change the banking call centers to now become crisis like NHS 111 for business support in that respect. People don't really understand that actually they're not the only ones that are trying to call. The call centers have actually gone in by, you know, had about 1,000% increase in the volume of stuff coming through. And don't forget, guys, if you're listening to this, you're now expecting your bank representative to almost become an emotional coach as well, because half the time it's not just about the business aspect. You're spending an inordinate amount of time having to listen to your emotional side of what's going on as well. So there's a balance here. And the reason I'm applying this right now is this is a call out for people to become patient and become pragmatic in what you're doing. Piers said a really valid point. If you are going down the loan scheme, invest more time and energy in building your business plan, your documentations, your financials, working with others to get that clear, and then start to put that process through. It doesn't have to be perfect from day one. The process, I'm sure, is going to continue to evolve, and as it evolves, so will the measures and the abilities and the criteria that the banks will offer you. And then we probably won't get statements like this: we've bailed out the banks, now they need your help. Business owners fury. They're saying that one in or a fifth of the business community are going to die in the next 4 to 6 weeks because banks aren't lending. They're being refused money. All of this kind of stuff. That there are businesses, SMEs out there that have enough cash reserves in their coffers. What happens is the media will only pick up this type of news, and unfortunately, this puts pressure on our fellow colleagues over where Nick is. This is what causes the problem. Now you read this, it frustrates you, it infuriates you, it makes you want to push up and be a lot more aggressive, or start to create more and more uncertainty. Martin Robinson, if you are watching this, you email me. I'll give you my email address, and I'll tell you why you shouldn't be writing stuff like this in the newspapers, because it's absolutely ridiculous.
I completely agree.
I'm going to add some good news here. Did you know that over the last 24 hours, as at 9 o'clock this morning, there was about 650-ish new companies formed?
Wow.
By lunchtime, that was 1,200. Now, there's a question as to whether that is Britain continuing with its optimism and the spirit of self-employment and so on, or is it the phoenix rising from the ashes? The majority are first-time directors as well.
Yeah.
So I've got a friend digging on this data hourly to find out where it's going. And, you know, that's for stuff that the media won't report on.
Of course.
But we're also tetchy and anxious at the moment. Let's be honest, none of us are sleeping properly. I know I'm certainly not. We're all riding on nerves, anxiety, caffeine, and whatever the government say at 5 p.m. every day. Yeah, if we look at when, I think it was on Friday, they intimated that it might be up to 6 months and everyone was in a panic for lockdown for 6 months. Yes, yesterday they said that it's a whole lot more positive. We're all riding based on what's in the media. So yeah, it's nice to have a little bit of balance alongside some of this bad news.
Yeah, can I just chime in, Nick? Just a couple of questions for you, maybe on more reassurance, which is, obviously, the government have offered sort of 80% assurance and guarantoring these loans, despite the liability still staying with the borrower. So the question is, how much of this has this 80% guarantee helped in improving the loan process?
I think it certainly has helped. I mean, not that you'd need, you know, you'd have to have your head completely under the earth to not understand exactly what the impacts and what's happening around us. So I think that's the first thing. I think secondly, you know, the fact that there is the government support behind it is absolutely key. But again, it's kind of, when we lend money to businesses, you kind of naturally have that day one. So the money's lent, company's happy, blah, 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 and we can kind of move on from there. But when you lend money, it doesn't always work out in the right manner. And so what we have to do, you know, we have to be very clear with businesses and business owners, that particularly at such a volatile time, where they're understanding that if they're borrowing the money, there is that expectation at some point that money is going to be paid back. It's also important that people understand that that guarantee from the government is only a last resort scenario. So what the borrower has to be understanding that 100% of whatever is borrowed, that is their obligation. And so, you know, God forbid if we went through that process where it didn't work out, we couldn't contact you, didn't hear about what was happening, and you kind of went through that recovery process, then the bank would have to explore every possible avenue to try and get that whole 100% back from that borrower before it was able to then look at the sort of the EFG, the Enterprise Finance Guarantee Scheme, as it was, the coronavirus business interruption guarantee from the government. So I think it does have. I think probably my overall summary of all of this, I think the offer of support and the package of announcements would have been perfect if everyone adhered and had what my mum had always taught me from a very early age, which was, if you've got 3 months worth of income saved away somewhere for that rainy day, then it will cover most bases. That's, I think, the shortfall, the glitch, the perhaps lack of understanding in the whole system, in terms of, you know, so many families, so many households, so many businesses live from week to week on a cash flow basis. And so when you have that extreme shock, the schemes are great in terms of their size, in terms of their intent, but obviously there is this initial shortfall in terms of cash flow need that a lot of businesses need in the short term. And, you know, there's kind of so many different places to go. And I think that's where the main pressure is being felt.
And I think we've seen that from the good and the great right down to grassroots. You know, Richard Branson looking for the government for a bailout 2 weeks after it. There was Laura Ashley, I think, were announcing going into administration the day after, as were Coluccio's again, I believe. Yeah. And I'm sure we're going to see a number of undercapitalized businesses coming out in the wash, unfortunately. But with those, we'll also catch some quite prudent businesses who've just been unlucky as well. I believe there will be a tranche of businesses where they were genuinely doing the right thing, but they've just been so directly impacted by this virus. I mean, I guess the perfect example of that would be Corona beer. You know, what else could they have done? But who's going to be drinking it over the next year?
Wow, if they put their prices down, I might go and buy it now. I don't care. It's a beer, right? No, but no, I absolutely adhere to and understand where both of you come in, Nick and Carl. So look, we're fastly coming towards the end of the time that we have, and I know Carl needs to get on to other podcasts and stuff like this. So I kind of I don't want to rush across the topic, but I do want to get your points in. So what advice and tips do you have for small business owners when setting out their strategies and financial plans? So the last bit that we're talking about here now is really some simple practical tips. Nick, you just mentioned, and Carl, I'm going to come to you first, and then I'll come to Nick. But Nick, you mentioned just this whole thing about having 3 months of cash flow in the pot for the rainy day kind of mentality. So Carl, bearing that in mind, what kind of advice would you be giving to any of our listeners, viewers right now around how they should start planning the way they are planning today? So if they've made mistakes,
rainy day funds would be lovely, but hindsight is also 2020, and I think a lot of people are learning today what they wish they would have learned 2 weeks ago, 2 months ago, 2 years ago. So whilst we can always look back and see what could have been done differently, these extraordinary times call for one thing only, and my biggest piece of advice here is to keep calm and keep a level head. I think that it's very easy to get sucked into panic. It's very easy to get depressed. It's very easy to become anxious. It's very easy to become over optimistic, over pessimistic. I think that as an entrepreneur, you actually need to get some balance. You need to have a calm head, a logical approach to this stuff rather than an emotional reaction, and make sure then that you follow the right steps insofar as getting your plans together, getting your projections together, being realistic rather than optimistic or pessimistic, and taking each day, day by day.
Brilliant tips there. And when it comes to kind of things like financial planning, the mistakes, the thing that they wish they knew, 2 weeks ago, 2 months ago, how should they reinforce this? I mean, you're thinking about if they are looking at sort of future business revenue, sales, should they be looking at kind of now splitting their money, the revenue that comes in, making sure they've got OPEX cover, making sure that they're keeping their VAT to the side? I mean, it's one of my normal practices I do anyway, and I implore everyone to do that.
I think businesses will need to manage their finances more prudently than ever before, insofar as making sure day-to-day it's running. However, Nick can correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't believe the banks will be too interested in helping businesses build up masses of reserves at this stage. I think that it would more be approached as life support and keeping the business to a point when things get back to normal, and then it's down to the business owner to build those reserves. Nick, correct me if I'm wrong, but I can't imagine putting in a business interruption loan scheme application for I don't know, £600,000 or whatever for reserves will go down too well at the moment.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think where perhaps we would start to have conversations with businesses in that situation where they're perhaps concerned that if this problem were to continue for a considerable period of time, then they know the process, to kind of know what they need to do, so they're kind of ahead of the curve, if that makes sense. But yeah, you'd be you wouldn't really want to kind of support people just kind of fattening their reserves through borrowing or through a facility. That probably wouldn't be a priority. It'd be very much about the emerging businesses that need the cash flow support, live here and now.
And that's interesting, because in some of today's newspaper readings and reporting, it's been a case that there are businesses here trying to build protection for the next 3 to 6 months. So even if they have cash reserves, they're saying we may run out of money in 3 months, and this is why we want a loan. And they're saying they're being rejected. But I think what you've just outlined there, Nick, explains what the understanding is, or the interpretation from the bank. It's almost like an emergency fund that keep you afloat, rather than keep putting the reserves in so you can sustain in that particular way. So what kind of advice would you give, Nick, in terms of small business owners? We've had the whole bit about calm down. We've got the whole thing about patience, be understanding and tolerant. But when they're coming into doing their financial planning, what kind of advice would you give them and tips?
So I think the biggest missing ingredient that unfortunately none of us can solve right now. I think the missing ingredient is knowing kind of what's happening with customers. And so my biggest sort of tip really would be talk. And that is to talk to your customers, talk to them on a human level right now. You've known them for how long, you know, kind of see how they're feeling, how they're coping with things, and then just keep in touch with them, because what you will then be able to do very naturally is pick up from them as and when things start to pick up and start to return to whatever the normality is. And if you've shown them that added value, you've shown them that care at the time, you know, when things were tough, then I think in a lot of circumstances, that's where small businesses are brilliant. You know, they're agile, but they're also so personal with their customers. And I think that's the greatest, or one of the greatest attributes that they've got, is that ability to know their customer, so that when things come back on stream, you know, in whatever the new format might look like, you're in that advantage of being there first, hearing about what's needed, and be there to meet customers' needs, you know, immediately.
Amazing stuff. And unfortunately, we've run out of time.
Can I just add one tip in, which I would throw in as well, which is, you know, to Nick's point, which is, if you're thinking of borrowing money under the CBILS scheme, try and put yourself in the position of the lender, and basically see what risk they would see. If you looked at yourself as being the lender, think what risk there is to them if they lend you this money. And, you know, if you would feel comfortable at it, then go forwards. But if you feel nervous about it and no, I wouldn't lend myself the money, then why would a bank do it?
Yeah, I guess what you're saying there, Piers, is apply a little bit of common sense and common logic to which is often it's very uncommon.
I was infuriated reading about Stelios, you know, who wants to be part of this government bailout, but still announces they're going to go ahead with their £175 million dividend payment, which is 60 million to him.
Yeah,
I mean, go figure.
I think that's a different conversation for a different day. Stelios, if you're happy to be watching this, we're happy for you to come on and answer to that. So just before we shut down, Nick, I know unfortunately Carl had to go. The floor's yours. Is there any lasting comments, anything else that you'd like to tell the British public and the international audience that we have watching this webinar? Any last bits of wisdom or advice before we close the webinar?
All I would just say is that at Natwest, we've known and we understand just how important the small business community is to the UK as a whole, certainly to ourselves as a business, absolutely vital. And this is a situation unlike any other. We're all learning as we go through the process. We're all kind of having to adapt in you know, huge numbers of ways. I mean, I've got more colleagues working from home than never before, but we've kind of adapted to that, and we're doing some you know, getting to people as much as we can. So the intent, you know, whatever you may hear, whatever you may read, our intent is absolutely to do what we can to support those businesses that we can. You know, for a lot, as I said, in a lot of the calls that we've been making in the sort of last couple of weeks, about half of those calls have been helping to sort of listen, first of all, to understand where that business is, see what options they've got, and that never gets reported anywhere, that never gets shared. So it is about, you know, trying to show that attention. And I think the other thing that we've done, and I think other banks have done as well, you know, we're looking at it in terms of our existing customers. We're not looking to kind of, you know, go out, seek new business. We absolutely prioritise, and the importance is around our existing customers first of all. So thanks for inviting me, Ketan, and look forward to some other digital clinics that you got coming up.
No, thank you. And for any of you watching this, Nick isn't going away too far. He'll be back on some of our other clinics where we start to drill into some more specifics. But look, Nick, I really appreciate you coming on and spending the time, giving the expertise, and more importantly, that perspective. I think NatWest and RBS as a group collectively are really flying the flag right now when it comes for the banks. They've really represented ethical stuff. They're supporting the nation in the way that we would expect them to, and you guys have actually set the precedence for everyone else to follow. So I think they can learn more from you guys and continued, and long may that continue in everything that we do. But you know, it is what it is. I think, you know, we will kind of look to review when you're next back on and see what the situation looks like, and perhaps be a little bit more specific to responding to the current situation then. Piers, I'd like to also thank you for spending more of your time and coming in and bringing in some of those contributions. For any of you that are watching this on record or on playback, if you have any questions, feel free to still put them through to us directly. You can come and comment those directly to me, or put them through onto from the COVID-19 Support Center contact list, and we will get those messages across to the experts, and we will get some responses back for you. We're not far away from finishing this week on our first run week of webinars. Tomorrow we have our last one for the week, where I've got Michael Jacobson and Piers Mummery back again, where we are going to be talking more about actually the strategy that you need to put into actually getting your business through this recovery, and more importantly, how do you make that business bulletproof? So look, thanks for joining me, Nick, Piers, Carl, if you're watching this back as well, thank you. And we hope to see you guys again soon.
Many thanks indeed.